is a podcast that explores our relationship with the natural world. It consists of interviews, stories, and discussions that highlight the notion that nature is not a place one goes to, but rather a place one is already a part of, that we are nature. For those of you who are new to the podcast, my name is Stefan Van Noorden. On this episode of Nature Revisited, we are pleased to welcome Amanda Leland to the podcast, talking about the new book, Sea Change, Unlikely Allies and a Success Story of Oceanic Proportions, which she co-wrote with James Workman. Amanda Leland is the Executive Director of the Environmental Defense Fund, an organization that works to stabilize the climate and strengthen the ability of people and nature to thrive. Sea Change tells the story of unlikely partnerships and surprising solutions that are quietly revolutionizing the fishing industry. It is a story of how the implementation of catch shares has helped make real change that is preventing overfishing and securing resource longevity. Sea Change is a captivating and deeply human tale of how fishermen have demonstrated how it is possible to conserve our natural world and serve the people who depend on it. Amanda, who fell in love with the oceans at 5, received her master's degree in marine biology, joins me from her home in Washington, D.C. So Amanda, welcome to Nature Revisited.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure having you on the podcast, talking about your new book, Sea Change. When did you first become interested in our oceans, and in particularly overfishing?
I grew up as an ocean kid. It was my grandfather, actually, who taught me how to fish and taught me how to drive a boat. So I grew up on the oceans. In the summers, I was either on the boat or at the beach. And that was really where my love of the ocean started. Fast forward through a lot of other great ocean-related experiences, including being a marine mammal zookeeper. I went to grad school for marine biology in Maine. My research was focused on trying to recover fishery that had been overharvested to the point basically it was gone. I had fishermen as part of my research team. It was a scuba diving research team. I spent a lot of time with them, and what they would say to me is, I don't take the last fish, someone else will. The finality of that statement really stuck with me. At the time, fisheries around the U.S. were all collapsing. There I was as a graduate student, and I thought, I don't want my future job to be writing the epitaph for fisheries. I want to find a solution and make this problem go away. And that's what I set out to do.
So what brought you and James Workman, your co-author, together to write the book?
My co-author is Jamie Workman. He's an award-winning published author. He used to be a speechwriter for Secretary of the Interior, Bruce Babbitt. He and I got together to write this book because we wanted to share this story with the world about the recovery of fisheries and to celebrate the fishermen heroes that sort of exist around us that we don't really know, and the really powerful change that has taken place over the last 2 decades, particularly in the U.S., but it's true in other places too. And I think right now we could all use some hope and some better news. This book is meant for the moment that we're in now.
So the main focus of Sea Change is catch shares. What are catch shares, And how do they work?
One of the challenges in fisheries in particular is getting the management strategy right so that it works for both fish and fishermen. What was happening as we were hurtling towards collapse in the big fisheries around the United States 20 years ago was a cat and mouse game between the regulators and the fishermen. As the fish populations plummeted, the regulators would put more restrictions on the fishermen, basically like trying to tie their hands behind their back to catch less fish. So they would say, you could only go out and fish on certain days, or you could only have an engine that's so big, or a boat that's so big, or my favorite, which is you can only catch a certain amount on each trip. They called them trip limits. But if you're a fisherman, this is your livelihood. You want to feed your family. You want economic opportunity in your community. If you're told you can only fish so much on a certain trip, what are you going to do? You're probably going to take more. That regulatory system was actually failing, and it was pushing fishermen to race to catch the last fish. So as an alternative, this catch shares approach is different in that it provides fishermen some certainty about what they can catch so they don't have to race against everybody else. It is predicated on science, helping to define how much fish can be caught in a year. The most important element and the really new part of it is it gives fishermen a stewardship incentive to conserve. So think of a pie, and the pie is the total amount that can be taken out of the fishery. Then you divide that pie up into pieces, and each fisherman, or sometimes it's a community, or sometimes it's a cooperative, get that piece of the pie. When the pie grows, as the resource gets bigger and rebounds from its overfished state, the pie grows, but so does each slice of that pie. You get to catch more if you conserve. And so that's the big shift that happens from a conservation standpoint. But there's also a lot of economic benefits as well. And there's safety benefits, which often we overlook. Fishing used to be the most deadly job in America for years, more dangerous than mining or agriculture, or of all the jobs that might be super dangerous. Fishing topped the list. A lot of people lost their lives at sea. It was a really dangerous job, in part because these fishermen were racing to go out to catch the fish before somebody else would. So when you have certainty about what your piece of the pie is, you can fish when the weather is better. You don't have to miss your kids' baseball games. You can go when the market conditions are better, so you end up getting a better price at the dock. One of the biggest costs of fishing is fuel. And so if you're not racing, you're not overpowering your fleet, you're saving an immense amount of fuel.
Can you share some of the history of commercial fishing in the U.S., going back to Washington, Jefferson, and Hamilton, and how that history relates to the present?
It was something I didn't know about before we started researching the book, and I give Jamie the credit for finding this nugget and finding a way to include it into the story. I think it really enriches the story. Going back to Washington, after the Revolutionary War, the United States needed to build its economy. It basically was gone from the cost of the war. So Washington tasked his two close advisors, who, as we all now know, did not get along, and asked Jefferson and Hamilton to come up with a fishing policy because the oceans were a great economic resource. And it's what brought some of the earliest colonial settlers over, was the fact that there were fish off of the eastern coast. You can kind of imagine how this played out if you know some of the Jefferson and Hamilton story, but Hamilton was really interested in how do you build an industrialized fishing fleet and what are the capital costs that are required. And Jefferson was really interested in how do you ensure more of the individual can go out on their boat and feed their local communities. But they were able to come together I don't know if this is the only thing they finally came together on, but they did come together around a new fisheries policy for the United States. And they called it sharesmen. Basically, the people who worked on the boat all were sharing in the revenue that came off the boat when the fish were caught and sold. And so it really is a predicate to what this catch shares model is, which is about cooperation and ensuring that the participants in the fishery are legitimized and that they have some certainty over their economic future. So it's a really interesting anecdote. It helps put in context what fisheries mean to people, particularly in the United States, how you can tie economics ultimately with the resource management.
So fishing has always been connected to storytelling. And the hero of Sea Change is a fisherman named Keith Buddy Gendon. Who is Buddy, and why did you choose his story?
Buddy Gwendon he's a hell of a fisherman, is like the best way to put it. So he was, and potentially still is, the highliner catching red snapper in the Gulf from Texas to Florida on the south coast of the United States. A highliner is the person who catches more than anybody else. He was known as a pirate by a lot of people, often called that directly. Like a lot of people, grew up with fishing in his blood, fishing with his dad recreationally on the lakes up in Minnesota as a kid. And you follow his life story through some hard times. He goes off and he serves in the Marines in the Pacific. And then you follow his life back to Texas. He owns a bar, working out of his dad's gas station, and ultimately get the fishing boat and try to make a career out of fishing. From there, he becomes the highliner. What's especially remarkable about Buddy's story and why he's the protagonist in the book is that he was potentially one of the biggest opponents to this move from this old management strategy where they were all racing to catch the last one to catch shares. The fishermen in the red snapper fishery, the commercial fishermen, had to vote twice to approve this new management system. Buddy voted against it both times. It passed by 80% both times. So he was in the minority voting against it. There was a lot of hard work to get to those 80% outcomes. But he voted against it twice. He thought he was better off participating in a fishery that he knew, even if it was failing him over the long term, than switching to some other system that he didn't know. The distrust he had for scientists and regulators and environmentalists like me was really high. He votes against it, and then the new strategy gets implemented. Within days, he's starting to see the benefits. And then weeks and a couple months go by, and he ultimately becomes the biggest champion of this management approach. His costs drop by 80% almost immediately. He gets a much higher price at the dock, I think potentially double what he was getting. And he was catching less fish because the resource was so depleted. It was actually 4% of historic levels when the catch share system was put into place. So it was all but gone. And so the fisherman took a pretty sizable cut just to stay fishing at all. And he was still able to build his business. During the Derby, he was counseling his kids out of the fishery. There's no future in fishing, he often would say. And then after catch shares, his 4 boys are in the family business. They've grown from a boat to several boats to a seafood market shop that you can go to Galveston and buy fresh seafood, to a wonderful restaurant that is a community hub called Katie's Seafood. So the before and the after are pretty different. Buddy embodies the resistance, the opposition. It reinforces a really important takeaway from the story, which is sometimes you got to sit down with the people that you disagree with. And often you can find a path. And that is what happened in this case.
So you show in the book how the fishing industry has been trying to find answers to overfishing for a long time. Why has it been so difficult to find solutions?
I think as a resource plummets, it gets harder and harder to be innovative and think creatively because the stakes are so high for the people whose lives depend on that resource. You get to just extreme mistrust. Everybody's blaming somebody else for the problem. It's human nature. I think when you're in a collapse situation, it gets harder and harder to find creative and new ways of doing things. And people get kind of more dug in on their own history because there's so much at stake. The catcher story, like where catchers came from, EDF, my organization, has been advocating for their implementation for a long time, but we didn't invent this. It is not ours. We saw how it was working in other places and were very much convinced on the merits that this was a better system. And I think for some people, they can be convinced on the merits before the change happens. But what's really important and what makes a huge difference is enfranchising the stakeholders as part of the program development process, working with the fishermen directly so that the new management system is going to work for them and what their needs are in their particular context. And that brings a lot more people in. That creates space for innovation and new ideas to come through and to try different variations on program design that can meet different kinds of needs. I don't know why it's hard, but I think it has something to do with sitting down and talking to each other when you're really angry and there's a lot at stake is actually really hard to do. It's really hard to suspend the crisis of the moment and think about what would it really take to get on a better path so that we don't have to be at this table in a crisis moment again. It's really hard to do that. It takes a lot of time and effort.
What were some of the ways that federal, state, and local governments have tried to solve overfishing, such as derbies?
So the derby is that race to the bottom. Often it's called the race to fish, but it really is a downward spiral you cannot get out of. One of the most famous of these stories is the Alaskan halibut fishery, which is very sustainable now, but was in a crisis phase. It was a 2-day season for years. It was so much of a race to fish that the regulators would stand on the dock and fire a gun to tell the boats when they could leave, and they could fish for 2 days and come back. This is true in fisheries locally. It's true in fisheries globally. It's kind of the universal attempt to try to constrain catches through this cat and mouse approach. You can adapt catch shares, this alternative. There's one in Belize. We worked for a long time with the Belizean government and fishermen in an adaptation of catch shares that's area-based. In Belize, these are localized fisheries. They're coral reef ecosystems. They're not like big offshore fisheries. You can allocate to communities certain zones or areas, and then they become enforcement agents fundamentally on the water. And the first year that Belize did this new management system, illegal fishing dropped 60%. It's a pretty phenomenal improvement. Now, it doesn't solve all of a fisheries problems, but it does create a platform that empowers those fishermen to be conservationists.
So you point out that catch shares may vary from location to location. What might catch shares look like in the Gulf of Mexico from those in the Gulf of Maine?
That's a good question. There's no one-size-fits-all approach here. It's not like you pull off of the shelf, here's the catch share program. And that gets at the point I made earlier that co-creation with the fishing community is really important to getting the design right. Each fishery has different needs, especially on some of the social aspects of fishing. One of the big challenges right now is ensuring that the next generation of fishermen can get into the fishery. And what is the pipeline for them to get in? What do they have to do? The apprenticeship kind of mindset. 20 years ago, nobody was thinking about that because there was no future in fishing. It was a collapsing industry. So I feel like this is a good problem to have, but it is a challenge. So in design, some of the elements that can change are who gets initial allocation, like how that gets developed, how you ensure transparency and enforcement and monitoring. Some fisheries have stationary cameras on boat decks that actually capture all the fish coming onto the deck. Sometimes they have human observers, so these are humans who are on the boat checking the catch to make sure that the limits aren't being breached and protected species aren't being taken. Sometimes it's a vessel monitoring system, which basically is a tracker. Where is it? Is it fishing where it's supposed to be or not? These are all really important elements of the program design, and they can be improved over time. It's not like it's a single point in time. The accuracy of the information is important. And fundamentally, when fishermen have this long-term stewardship incentive, it's in their best interest to ensure every other fisherman in the fleet is following the same rules and is being transparent and is accounting for their catch. It creates much more of a dynamic where they individually have good information and that the fleet as a whole is operating on the same rules.
Often when I talk with people about our environmental issues, they say the real solutions are cultural. Are catch shares changing the culture of commercial fishing?
I think the answer is yes. And I say that because I hear about the lived experience from the fishermen themselves. And I think the story of Buddy counseling his kids out of the business and now all four boys are in the business is a huge shift. And that's how you keep that tradition going on. It looks different over time. Not all of them are out fishing. Some of them are running the restaurant or the fish house, but they're in the business and they're building community, which is really important. Just this last week when I was with 5 of our fishermen partners, some of whom are on the West Coast and some of whom are in the Gulf, they share a common agenda in a way they kind of didn't before. They were more specifically focused on their own fishery with their own context. And now they work together around the country. They may be prosecuting very different fisheries in very different places, but they show up together as a force, advocating for good, sustainable fisheries management policy, advocating for scientific research, engaging in the scientific research. That really didn't happen before. I don't want to give the catch share management system too much credit, but I think it enabled fishermen to be more empowered and to be more of a driver of progress than was possible when they were in a collapsing fishery.
So what do you hope the future of fishing and catch shares might look like?
One thing we haven't talked about yet is climate change, which is a pretty significant change agent of the oceans itself. The oceans are warming dramatically. The Gulf in particular is warming rapidly. The oceans, I often say, are on the front lines of climate change because they're absorbing heat and they're absorbing CO2. The oceans have been stable for a very long time. And so species have evolved to operate in some pretty specific thermal tolerance. They're not used to like big swings of the super hot in particular. They were never exposed to that before. Wildlife in the oceans is moving to find cooler waters. It's moving away from the tropics and toward the poles. It's moving into deeper waters. The real challenge now is how to ensure sustainable fisheries in that context. Innovation around an adaptation of catch share programs could be one of the really helpful tools that managers have, because you're much more likely to be able to link up catch share programs from one geography to another. You got to think about this as a fish. They are just living their lives in the ocean, and they may cross from the US into Canada, or they may cross from Russia into Canada, or Peru into Chile in South America. The fish stocks themselves are moving, which means the management needs to operate at that scale too. And there's more promise, I would say, in the context of catch shares than there is in a situation of collapsing fisheries where people are already desperate.
So finally, can you share some of the lessons we all can take from the fishing crisis that could help us with other environmental crises that we face?
We wrote this book not just to talk about fish, but really it's a story of hope that does have these much broader lessons, I think. And one of them is that heroes can be hiding in plain sight. I think often we glorify heroes, that somehow they're called into it. There's like a special purpose. But honestly, Buddy, he never asked to be a hero. He really didn't. But he is such a powerful hero in the story. So I think we should look in our own communities. Heroes can be hiding in plain sight. Another is when you sit down with people you don't otherwise agree with, you can often find a path forward. You got to listen to what each other's needs are and sort of square that up. The story talks about how that happens, and it happened community and community and community. And it didn't always go right, but it is a really important lever for change. And then I think the third lesson is that the solutions that last are the ones that help improve people's lives pretty quickly. As an environmentalist myself, I think sometimes we ask people to take pain now for some future gain. Humans are not built for that. When the solution has the benefits that improve regular people's lives pretty quickly, it's going to stay around despite whatever political change there is. And I think it's going to make a real difference in the world.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Amanda Leland, and that you get the opportunity to read her book, Sea Change: Unlikely Allies and a Success Story of Oceanic Proportions. You can also learn more about the work Amanda is doing in conjunction with the Environmental Defense Fund at edf.org. If you enjoyed this episode of Nature Revisited, please share with friends, family, and colleagues. And please rate us on your favorite podcast server. It will help us to reach a larger audience. You can follow Nature Revisited on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on our website, nordenproductions.com. And please share your comments and suggestions for future guests for Nature Revisited on the comment section of this episode on our website. The music for this episode is The Machine in the Garden by Ben Cosgrove from his album, The Trouble with Wilderness. The Nature Revisited team consists of Stefan Van Orden, Charles Gagan, and Scott Chasky. And I hope you will join us for the next edition of Nature Revisited. And in the meantime, remember, we are nature.